Hi everybody, it's Cash. Welcome back. Thank you very much for joining me today. I want to tell you what happened when I went into the energy of the crossover for Ozzy Osbourne, the legendary heavy metal singer. He died this week, July 2025, at the age of 76 of Parkinson's disease. He'd been dealing with it since about 2003, I think. Many people asked for his transition, which basically means I follow the full emotional spectrum of the person right through to the point of ascension. But I tend not to do that shortly after they die because it's disrespectful to their family and so on. So a crossover is just unemotional. It's just a matter-of-fact thing of what happens. However, in Ozzy Osbourne's case, unlike I think any other one I've done, the crossover and the transition merged. They were very similar, and they were over and done with before I had time to stop it. So I will tell you the full thing later on, but I've never seen that other than with Ozzy Osbourne. As regular viewers to this channel will already realise, I know almost nothing about music. I have a kind of mild Aspergery thing going on, which means I can't listen to music, particularly heavy metal music. It does my head in. And so I knew nothing whatsoever about Ozzy Osbourne, which is a good thing for the pictures. It means I approach them completely clean with no bias and no understanding or whatever, and therefore I did the pictures first and I looked up the information about him after I'd done them, which makes them even more fascinating actually. But I found out that he was the lead singer with a band called Black Sabbath, and they were immensely popular. I think they kicked him out after a while, maybe around 1979, something like that, because of his alcohol and drug problems. But he then went on and had a solo career, which was also incredibly successful. But he came to prominence in a lot of people's eyes in about 2002 when he and his family appeared in a show called The Osbournes, which was groundbreaking television in its way and acknowledged as such because they allowed cameras into their home to film their ups and downs. And it was eye-opening. I saw a couple of episodes back then, which is how I knew about him. His father was some kind of mechanic with General Electric, but Ozzy had no education and he went into that kind of trade as well. He was a plumber for a while and he worked on construction sites and so on. And then at some point he heard She Loves You by the Beatles. And it changed his entire perspective for his life. He became dedicated to the whole idea of being a rock star. And that's exactly what he became. But he was a maniac in his way. He was wild, with lots of addictions. And when he was with the band, Black Sabbath, he was even wilder and more outrageous. At an executive meeting with the record company, he bit the head off a dove in front of all the executives, and then the following year he bit the head off a bat on stage, and that became his legend, really. He always thought it would be on his gravestone at the end. He bit the head off a bat. It made him an icon, a legend with tens, if not hundreds of millions of people globally. To the point where, when he appeared on the Osbournes, it was quite shocking to see this Prince of Darkness character in a domestic situation. But what made that show ultra successful and made Ozzy Osbourne so attractive was his willingness to appear vulnerable and authentic before the cameras. He didn't hide his foibles. He didn't hide his addictions. He didn't hide his weaknesses. They were all on full display. And people appreciated that. I mean, he wasn't a well man for the longest time. He had tremors because of his drug addiction. And he had problems walking due to back surgeries, I think he'd had. He'd had some kind of accident and wasn't well on that score either. And yet he allowed the cameras to follow him around. I was in a coffee shop in Los Angeles on Sunset Boulevard, a Starbucks, many, many years ago. And a lot of stars used to go into that Starbucks. I saw Pamela Anderson during her heyday, Andrew Dice Clay, several others would come in from the Hollywood Hills and buy their coffee in that place. And then one day, I was sitting there doing my writing or whatever at a table, and two guys walk in. One of them has a very, very wide-brimmed hat on and a long coat. The other one offers him a chair and goes off to get coffee. The guy in the wide-brimmed hat missed the chair when he was sitting down and fell onto the floor and had to be picked up by other people. That was Ozzy Osbourne. But even in that confined space of a small Starbucks, the love for this guy was palpable. Nobody thought, oh, he's fallen over, he's getting old, he's ill. Nobody thought that. Everybody thought, it's Ozzy Osbourne, what a treasure. And they all ran to help him. Not because he was a star, though. That was the amazing thing, which it would have happened with somebody else. It would have been, oh, they're a star, let's help him up. This was because they loved this guy. And although I can't, because of his music and the screaming into the microphone stuff, I can't endear myself to any of that music, I could see just that one day what an absolute gem this guy was in the eyes of the people around him. He had, I think, 6 children, maybe 10 grandchildren at the point when he died, and he knew he was going, apparently. And it's very, very sad for the people he's leaving behind, and, of course, all the fans. So when I went into his energy, I actually knew almost none of that. I simply put him in front of me to see what happened with his crossover. That's all I intended to do. But when I did, I saw something I've never seen before. He was floating upwards. He was rising, which is such a contrast to other people who seem to either go down to their end or they enter a tunnel which is kind of dark. It's like an interstitial period before they actually cross over. They do that a lot. Nobody really rises. And when I pulled back, in front of him, making him look incredibly small, actually, was an enormous wall. Like it would be 3 aircraft hangars high, maybe, or 10 IMAX screens high. And it was this kind of bubblegum pink and lit as if illuminated from the inside. And he rose up the wall. It was so strange. But way up at the top, over here on like the left-hand side, there was a hole in the wall, one hole. And that's where he was rising to. Like up and across and up and across. It reminded me of the docking procedure from 2001: A Space Odyssey. The way all the elements were positioned to accurately allow the docking of the spaceship. It was like that. He was moving towards that space. That was his exit point. He was so addicted, maybe, to life, so committed to life, maybe committed to his family in a massive way, so committed that he was only willing to accept one particular exit point. And so, despite his injuries and despite his illnesses and so on, his weakness towards the end, he was only prepared to accept that. And he rose, and he rose, and he moved across and across and up, and eventually went into that hole. The dying process for him began then. Everything up to that point had been a preamble, gradually winding down his physical life. And there was some kind of adjustment needed at this point. He'd been somewhat blinded by that bubblegum light, and now he was in a different phase and he knew it at a consciousness level. As the tunnel went along, there was an opening at the other end, actually, as if there was something that could have been done last minute. Some quick reprieve or some alleviation of the issue or something like that, whatever that might be to him. But before that light, before that exit point, there was a chute going downwards. He was being offered a choice. Continue fighting, continue battling to stay alive. Accept this small reprieve for what it was worth. Or let go, finally. When I had my near-death experience a few years ago, you may remember that I heard a voice, maybe the voice of my higher self, saying, "You can go now if you want." And I, in my conscious self, said, "Do I have brain damage?" And my higher self said no. And I made the choice to come back at that point. In his case, after so much struggle, physically, mentally, and now with the Parkinson's thing as well, the gradual wind down over 22 years, this chute looked attractive in ways it might never have done before, which explains, I suppose, why it took so long for him to get up that wall to the little hole, to that one exit point he was prepared to consider. But this is where he finally let go of his resistance and fell away. And he went down the chute and ended up in that tunnel that I so often see that leads to the rest of the transition. But fascinatingly, there was a lip up. And he was lying this side of the lip up to the cave that lies beyond, metaphorically speaking. And it was like, you have to put in the effort. I think there was such a fighting spirit here, such a desire for survival, maybe not for its own sake, but for the sake of his family, or to be around his family, that it took extra effort to not cling on. And the universe said, make this final choice if you want to. Although if he hadn't, there was no going back, so I don't quite understand what that would have been about, what the consequences would have been. But he did. He was done, as far as I can tell. He'd taken his life on the mortal 3D plane as far as it could possibly go. He'd worn his physical self out. But what was so interesting about him was that he didn't seem to care about any of this, the cave, the process, whatever. Once the attachment was broken finally to what was keeping him rooted in form, it was then all business to the end. Now, it's strange that so many people criticized him in life for glorifying Satanism, when in actual fact, I think he was Church of England. He came from a Catholic mother, maybe? I don't know. But there was a religious foundation there at some level. But he got into this place and it didn't really concern him. There was a mad dash, like when you have to go to the bathroom urgently. And there's that last few steps where you really, really have to get in there and do your thing. It was like that. He had now an urgent mission. And as I watched, he was starting to not disintegrate, but there were bits floating around him as though his energy was breaking apart. And it was leading him, like the energy first and then the rest of him, his consciousness. It's like, come on, come on, come on, gotta go. And this is what happened as he went up the tunnel. More of this energy began splintering away, like the mad dash to the bathroom. Up the tunnel as fast as he could go. His soul was basically fragmenting with urgency to get where it needed to go. And his consciousness was dragging behind it. And when he got to this dome of light that I always see, it doesn't exist, but it's like a metaphorical thing. But when he got to that at the top, it was straight in. A mad dash. Soul first, consciousness afterwards, gone to join universal consciousness and ascend into the light, whatever that entails. But it was remarkable to me the speed with which all of this happened once he had let go. Once he'd made that final decision to climb over that lip and release what was holding him back, what had kept him tied, bonded to life for so long, despite all his setbacks and problems and illnesses and so on. Once he made that choice, it was like, you hung on too long, kid. We gotta go. We're going to miss the train. And off they went, the consciousness and soul together, up the tunnel and into the light. I wonder if we have a specific moment when it's our time to go. I mean, we say about that, well, when it's my time, it's my time. But I wonder if that's actually true. But because of modern technology and science and medicine and whatever, we are able to stall that and go, I know it's probably my time, but if I see the right doctor and I pay the right amount of money, I get the right pills and the right procedure, I could put this off for a while. And if you're rich and successful and you have the funds, maybe you can stall it for a number of years. Maybe that's what happened to him. He bought an extension on his natural life. When somebody who had put his body through so much over the decades, when they, like many of their contemporaries, might go in their 50s or 60s, just basically worn out. They're a husk by that point. Ozzy Osbourne, because of his fighting spirit and his desire to survive and be with his family, all that love I talked about that was in that show, the unconditional love, all of that was a bond that gave him reasons to outlive his physical life, maybe. But it meant that by the time he finally got to that cave thing that I see, his soul was saying, we gotta go. We have a date with destiny. Come on. And his consciousness simply ran behind it. And he was gone. So what had been his crossover initially, that's all I was looking at doing, became his transition by virtue of the speed with which it happened. It was over and done with before I had time to even consider whether I was doing a transition or not. It was bam, 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 and away. I wonder whether we can extend our life with A, determination, and B, treatment, money. If B were the case, wouldn't more rich people live longer? And I'm not absolutely sure they do. But maybe they don't have that fighting spirit, that desire that's so profound to survive and be with his family that Ozzy Osbourne did. I mean, he was celebrated to the very, very end. I think he gave his final concert 17 days before he died. A huge encouragement to those of us he leaves behind who perhaps might not give up so easily on life simply because a doctor says, oh, it's over. Oh, wind up your affairs. Those kind of situations. Maybe Ozzy Osbourne wouldn't give in to that. That kind of spirit doesn't give in to that. It goes on until the little hole appears in the wall. And then it's like, that's where I'm going. Whatever it takes, I will get there. And then he's done. I learned an unusual amount from this man I knew almost nothing about, Ozzy Osbourne. And for that, I'm very grateful. Alrighty, thank you very much for watching. I'll see you very soon, guys. Bye-bye.